Lord of the Nazgûl has become one of my favorite commanders from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set. Now we've covered this commander already on the channel with a high-powered deck focused on consistent, powerful wins. In this video, however, we're going to revisit this commander with a more flavorful, casual brew. As a refresher, Lord of the Nazgûl is a 4/3 Wraith Noble for 3 generic mana, 1 blue, and 1 black. It has flying. Wraiths you control have protection from Ring Bearers. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you create a 3/3 Black Wraith creature token with Menace. Then if you control 9 or more Wraiths, Wraiths you control have base power and toughness 9/9 until end of turn. This deck is going to focus on getting out Wraiths and overpowering our opponents through the sheer size and inevitability of our creatures. Our deck has 2 main goals. The first is, as we had mentioned, being a Wraith-type deck, featuring the Nazgûl and their lords, as well as some powerful support cards. The second centers around the Ring Temptation mechanic, utilizing the powerful abilities that are bestowed upon our Ring Bearer to give tremendous power to the Ring Bearer. To that end, let's begin with having the 9 Nazgûl. These are 1/2 creatures with Death Touch for 2 and a black. These will give us a Ring Temptation trigger upon them entering the battlefield. As a quick refresher, when you are first tempted by the ring, if you do not control one, you get an emblem called the Ring, and then gain the first of its abilities at the top of the list. You gain these abilities from top to bottom as you are further tempted by the ring. When you are tempted, if you control a creature, you can choose to make it your Ring Bearer, who gains these abilities while it is your Ring Bearer. If you do not own a creature, you can opt not to have a Ring Bearer be chosen. You can choose each time to maintain the same creature to be your Ring Bearer, but you must choose a creature you control if you do control one. The abilities of the emblem remain for the duration of the game. Anyway, back to the spookies. We are running the maximum 9 copies of this card in the deck, and whenever the ring tempts you, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each Wraith you control. If we have multiple copies of the Nazgûl in play, these +1/+1 counters will add up pretty quickly, as each will trigger upon each temptation of the ring. Remember, once we get 9 or more Wraiths in play, the base power and toughness all around becomes 9/9, and then we factor in what the +1/+1 counters will do, meaning that this deck has the potential to get really big with these creatures. We also run both Witch King of Angmar and the Witch King Bringer of Ruin. The Witch King of Angmar is a 5/3 with flying for 5 mana, and whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to you, each opponent must sacrifice a creature that's dealt damage to you this turn, and then we get a Ring Temptation trigger. This is an homage to the Witch King's power to destroy any weapon used against him, and this makes him a tremendous threat to players wanting to push through to attack us. He also has an activated ability where we can discard a card to give him indestructible at the end of turn and tap it. This is a powerful ability, letting us pitch cards to the graveyard, something that can be done multiple times per turn, and help us set up our graveyard for later. The Bringer of Ruin is slightly more expensive to cast at 6 mana, 4 and 2 black, for a 5/3 with flying. This version has an attack trigger where the defending player must sacrifice their smallest creature before the blockers are declared. This makes the Witch King an excellent defensive force to clear off our opponent's creature and make them unable to chump block as advantageously without those smaller creatures. We also have Sauron the Necromancer, a 4/4 Avatar Horror with Menace for 3 generic and 2 black mana. Whenever Sauron attacks, exile a target creature from your graveyard. You create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that card, except that it's a 3/3 Black Wraith with Menace. At the beginning of the next end step, you exile that token unless Sauron is your Ring Bearer. So this is one of our Reanimator engines. Sauron can turn the creatures in our deck that are not Wraiths into Wraiths, and this can be an excellent way to get our Nazgûl out of the graveyard. This actually makes them stronger, as they'll retain all of their abilities, but are base power 3/3 instead of base power 1/2. And the exile clause will likely not need to trigger, as we absolutely can and should be making Sauron our Ring Bearer if he's out. In fact, once the token copy of a Nazgûl enters play, we will get a Ring Temptation trigger, and should obviously give that Ring Bearer status to the Lord of the Rings. We have Masquid Nexus as a pretty easy way to create basic 2/2 blue shapeshifters with Changeling, which makes them also coincidentally Wraiths. Remember, we need only 9 Wraiths to be in play to make them all base power 9/9, and that's not even to say how many +1/+1 counters will have been spread around by the time that ability goes off. We run Orcish Bowmasters as a nice deterrent to decks wanting to get their card draw going, as it will not only burn them for each card drawn, but it will begin building up our Orc Army token. The army token isn't super relevant in this deck, besides being a potentially huge creature, but we do run some wheel effects that, combined with the Bowmasters, can result in one giant orcish army. Notion Thief functions in a similar manner, though instead of burning each opponent for their excessive card draw, we're going to simply steal their card draw. Considering this deck can generate huge creatures fast, opponents will be hard pressed to dig for an answer before we can overrun them. Lastly, one of our basic card draw engines in this deck is Archmage Emeritus, who gives us a card draw for each instant or sorcery that we cast or copy. The majority of our deck is aimed at those two card types precisely, as our commander will reward them with Wraith tokens and big creatures. Our creature base is rather small, though we do have a lot of card draw power to get us to those creatures, and we are dabbling in some reanimation. Cards like Dark Deal and Windfall will let us cycle our hands, potentially filling up our graveyard with the Wraith creatures that we can bring back later on with cards like Animate Dead, Living Death, Necromancy, Patriarch's Bidding, Persist, Reanimate, Sam's Desperate Rescue, Unearth, and then the aforementioned Sauron. Now, we are looking to be tempted by the ring pretty early on. We have a lot of ways to go about doing so, and these will all help us gain the abilities of the ring and move the ring bearer status to whichever creature we need it to be on. Birthday Escape is literally a 1-mana cantrip with a ringed tempt trigger. Keep in mind that this and many of the cards we're about to mention will also give us a 3/3 black Wraith creature token if the Lord of the Nazgûl is in play. Claim the Precious is a sorcery speed murder that's in here because it's got that ring tempt trigger. Ring Sight tempts us, then lets us tutor for a card that shares a color with a legendary creature we control. Should our commander be in play, we can literally tutor for any non-artifact spell in our deck, which is pretty powerful. Sam's Desperate Rescue is a Disentomb with a ring trigger on it, and it can be great to help get a Nazgûl back to hand. Golem's Bite is a pretty neat piece of removal that also has a second use while it's in the graveyard, and even at sorcery speed, the ring tempt trigger can help us build up that ring ability before we swing in. Sauron's Ransom is also pretty interesting as it acts as a factor fiction of sorts with, you guessed it, a ring trigger. Because we can get some things out of the graveyard later on, it really doesn't matter which pile goes to the graveyard. Soothing of Smeagol is a bounce spell with a ringed tempt trigger. Inherited Envelope is a mana rock with an ETB ring tempt trigger. Call of the Ring is a nice substitute in this deck for a card like Necropotence, as it gives us a ring temptation at the beginning of our upkeep, and we can offer card draw for 2 life. It also is a lot less hungry for black mana, as it only has 1 black pip instead of Necropotence's 3. Lastly, 1 ring to rule them all gives us a ring tempt, followed by a mill on the first chapter. On the second, it destroys all non-legendary creatures. On the third, it'll burn each opponent for each creature in their respective graveyards. This can also help set us up for our reanimation targets, as our mills might possibly send some spicy targets to the graveyard. Now that we've discussed the main elements of this deck, let's discuss some of the other aspects this deck has, starting with the board wipes. We have Crippling Fear, which will give -3/-3 to every non-wraith creature. This should clear up a lot of the value creatures and potential blockers, leaving room for our Nazgûl to swing in unimpeded for game. Toxic Deluge is a similar type of board wipe to the Crippling Fear, giving a debuff that will likely keep the field clear of any creatures. Cyclonic Rift needs no explanation. It's a dual-purpose spot removal and board wipe, and it should be included to help clear the way for our Wraiths. We have a few card draw spells here, namely Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study for a passive card draw that our opponents will have to deal with if they expect to produce their game plan. We mentioned Call of the Ring earlier, as it takes the place of Necropotence in this deck as an easy-to-trigger card draw. Brainstorm lets us dig 3 cards in and can help us set up the top of our library for future turns if we have a mill trigger incoming. Frantic Search is basically a free looting spell. This can be used to send dead cards from our hand to the graveyard, possibly for reanimation later on. Opt gives us Scry and then card draw on an instant. Gitaxian Probe lets us peek at an opponent's hand and draw a card on an instant. Spells like this can be used defensively while our commander is out if we need to make a blocker. Night's Whisper is a cheap 2-card draw spell. It's basic value. Ponder offers us card draw after a potential shuffle, and I almost would consider this better than Scrying, as if those 3 cards you picked up were not great to draw, we can shuffle them away and potentially draw a better card. Black Arca Connections is an all-star in this deck, providing us with literally all the value we could need. We might have to trade in some life to get them, but we can get a treasure each turn for 1 life, card draw for 2 life, or a 3/3 shape shifter with Changeling for 3. That creature is also a Wraith, so that can contribute to our main strategy, huzzah! Mindstone is a mana rock that we can trade in later for card draw once we no longer require it. Of course, the One Ring had to be in here. It offers us total protection on the turn cycle it comes in, and then it could be used to give us incremental card draw as we build up the burden counters on it. Let's briefly touch upon our mana ramp. Beyond our land base, which is more heavily in black mana than blue, we do have a number of mana rocks. Arcane Signet and Talisman of Dominance are our 2-drop all-stars, giving us both of our colors. The aforementioned Mind Stone and Inherited Envelope give us some additional mana ramp and extra value. Dark Ritual can give us a burst of black mana to help us get out our commander a few turns early, or can help us ramp up to go into a surprise spell. Our main strategy focuses on getting out our commander and his Nazgûl servants, getting those ring tempt triggers to bulk up our creatures, and then when they are large enough, swinging for lethal. We can even lean on cards like Cover of Darkness to make our creatures even harder to block. Menace, Fear, Flying, Death Touch are all very dangerous keywords to have on such huge creatures, not to mention all the +1/+1 counters that we're going to be handing out. Our commander has a lot of utility in giving our race protection from ring bearers. With the Lord of the Rings set being the new kid on the block and being a very interesting set to build into, a lot of players are going to be building decks that are likely going to have some element of the ring bearer mechanic. That blanket protection can be helpful, and his ability to create 3/3 menace tokens is going to be a lot of value. We run a total of 32 spells in this deck that will trigger that ability, and as we get those tokens into play, and then our Nazgûl into play as well, our army will be growing to a point where our opponents will not be able to stop us. We have our Witch King cards here to deter opponents from coming at us, and then we have plenty of power on the board to stop those who are foolish enough to attack us. That brings us to the end of our second look at Lord of the Nazgûl. Is this a deck you'll enjoy playing? If you're into spell slinging and huge threat creatures, I think this is a very thematic and fun deck you'll want to pick up. You can scale it to whatever level of power you want it to be, whether you want it to be a more fun casual deck, or if you even want to take a crack at making it into the CEDH space. You can check out the Moxfield link down below to see the full deck list. You can playtest it over on Moxfield, and if you want to pick up the deck yourself in paper, they have links to buy it on Card Kingdom, TCG Player, and CoolStuffInc.com. You can also get it on MTGO through Card Hoarder, so definitely check that out. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, likes and shares are graciously appreciated. 95% of my audience this month aren't subscribers, and to those of you who aren't, feel free to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so that you never miss another video. And as always, I'll catch you all next time.